In Matthew 11, verses 28 to 30, Christ calls us to come to worship, to rest from the things that are troubling us, to learn what Christ can teach of life, to realize what we can offer to others, and so return to the world to serve. If you are tired from carrying heavy burdens, come to me and I will give you rest. Take the yoke I give you, put it on your shoulders and learn from me. I am gentle and humble, and you will find rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now God has given us some wonderful gifts. The bounty of the earth, tastes and scents both strong and subtle, a whole rainbow of emotions, the power of love, passions of the heart and soul. We also learn that God expects us to look after these gifts and use them well. I should like to explore that with you today. We thank you, Lord, for all these gifts and pray that we may hear your word today. Because with any gift comes responsibilities, such as stewardship, which can be nicely highlighted through one of Aesop's fables. Now, Aesop lived about 600 years before Christ was born, so quite a long time ago. He was a slave in Phrygia. Now, that is modern-day Turkey. And he was reportedly particularly ugly, and thus so offended his masters that they threw him over a high cliff to his death. But with classic irony, he has since been revered for the beauty of the wisdom encapsulated in his famous fables. And here is one of them. A man sold all that he had and bought a lump of gold, which he buried in a hole in the ground by the side of an old wall and went to look at daily. One of his workmen observed his frequent visits to the spot and decided to watch his movements. He soon discovered the secret of the hidden treasure, and digging down, came to the lump of gold and stole it. The man, on his next visit, found the hole empty and began to tear his hair and make loud lamentations. A neighbor, seeing him overcome with grief and learning the cause, said, "Oh, pray, do not grieve so, but go and take a stone and place it in the hole. And fancy that the gold is still lying there. It will do you quite the same service, for when the gold was there, you had it not, as you did not make the slightest use of it." Indeed, we must use the gifts that we have been given. But of course, with that use comes the risk of misuse. Now, the Reverend Fred Kahn, a clergyman in the Congregational Church, wrote a hymn along these lines. His poetry is wonderful. And it's even more so when you consider that he was Dutch, with English as his second language. Fred Kahn died in 2009 when he was 80 years old after years of suffering from Alzheimer's disease and cancer. His teenage years coincided with the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, and his experiences had lasting effect on his writing. Please think about the words as I read them. They are powerful words of thanksgiving, but they also expose some of the misuse to which we put God's wonderful gifts in all its destructive wickedness. Now join we to praise the Creator, our voices in worship and song. We stand to recall with thanksgiving that to him all seasons belong. We thank you, O God, for your goodness, for the joy and abundance of crops, for food that is stored in our larders, for all that we buy in the shops, but also of need and starvation. We sing with concern and despair, of skills that are used for destruction of land that is burned and laid bare. We cry for the plight of the hungry, while harvests are left on the field, for orchards neglected and wasting, for produce from markets withheld. The song grows in depth and in wideness. The earth and its people are one. There can be no thanks without giving, no words without deeds that are done. Then teach us, O Lord of the harvest, to be humble in all that we claim, to share what we have with the nations, to care for the world in your name. Now, Jesus takes up the themes of both use and misuse of gifts in our reading from Luke 16, 1-9. Audrey.
Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Audrey. Well, that's a difficult reading, isn't it? Not least because of the last two verses. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. Good grief. How on earth can Jesus be commending dishonesty in this way? Oh, and then worse still, the last verse. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Now this might strike the unwary as a call to embrace dishonesty and greed for a ticket to heaven. Fortunately, John Wesley wrote one of his famous sermons on this passage entitled The Use of Money, where, inspired by these verses, he directed us all to gain all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. Now, as many of you will know, John Wesley was a famous Anglican cleric who lived in the 18th century, and he's credited, alongside his brother, Charles Wesley, with founding the Methodist movement. I happen to be from the Methodist Church, so hence I know a bit about John Wesley. Now, throughout his life, he remained with the established church, and although his somewhat maverick use of church policy put him at odds with many within the Anglican Church, by the end of his life, he was widely respected, and he was referred to as the best-loved man in England. Now, in his sermon on the use of money, on that very passage, John Wesley made it clear that Jesus was particularly talking directly to his disciples to ensure that they recognized money as one of God's greatest gifts because of its potential to do enormous good. Now, Jesus explicitly acknowledges that because its misuse is so rampant, there is a tendency for his followers, the people of light, unwisely to steer clear of the subject, whereas they should gain friends, i.e. do all possible good, with worldly wealth, i.e. money, and so demonstrate the stewardship that God is looking for. So, John Wesley came up with, gain all you can, but not at the expense of our own or others' physical or spiritual health, i.e. no workaholics or cheats, thank you. Save all you can, and that's for the purpose of giving, not hoarding, and give all you can, where we consider the use of money as a spiritual discipline. We should then see that the point is not to give away what we think is extra. The point is to play our role in distributing God's resources equitably, not denying our own needs, but seeing the needs of others to be as legitimate as our own. Now, John Wesley certainly followed his own advice. As a young man, he was earning £30 a year, and he established an annual budget of £28, and he gave away the remaining £2. The next year, he earned £60, but he still lived on 28 and gave away 32. He continued in this vein for the rest of his life. In the course of 50 years, it has been supposed, he gave away between £20,000 and £30,000, the equivalent in today's money of £2 to £3 million. Now, although he earned extremely well from his writing throughout his life, by the time he died, all his money had gone and there was nothing left. Now, in this vein, John Wesley also set up cooperatives for his church groups, where every member paid in a weekly subscription to build and maintain a fund from which members that later faced financial difficulties could draw upon as loans. Now, credit unions as such did not appear formally until the mid-19th century, long after John Wesley died, but the model credit unions follow is essentially the same as his original cooperatives. Now, one of my favorite Bible stories is Jesus' righteous anger in the temple in the run-up to Passover, throwing out the money changers. I like the representation of Jesus as a strong and active man, full of power and passion, directly taking up the fight against greed and usury. I was therefore particularly inspired when I read about Archbishop Justin Welby's campaign to drive out our modern equivalents, the rash of payday lenders like Wonga, by providing active support to credit unions to compete the loan sharks out of business. For me, that is just the thing that a strong and principled church should be focusing on. Now, payday lenders are organizations that lend money on a short-term basis at interest rates of over 1,500%. They can do this because their customers are desperate, have poor credit histories, and believe that they have no other option. Customers therefore borrow at these exorbitant rates to keep themselves afloat until their next payday, hence the name. And once trapped by a payday lender, it is very difficult to extricate yourself from the vicious cycle of debt that follows. Typically, the client will then borrow more to pay back the interest on the previous loan, and so it goes on to bankruptcy, relationship breakdown, crime, repossession, and homelessness. Now, Wonga are particularly strong in this market, and you will have seen them continually advertising on TV, which itself is a demonstration of the excessive profits they are making from the vulnerable in our society for their own personal gain. The financial crash has placed more people at risk of falling into that vicious cycle of indebtedness. At the same time, the regular high street banks exclude individuals with poor credit histories from getting help in order to protect their own business model. Now, I volunteer at the Whitechapel Mission in Stepney. It's a day centre for the homeless on Tuesdays, and I have seen the results of this appalling business knocking daily at those doors. As I said, credit unions are not a new phenomenon. Indeed, the modern credit union movement actually started in Germany in the 1850s and then spread throughout Europe and North America by the start of the 20th century. So, when I read about his campaign, I wrote to the Archbishop to show my support and to ask how best I could help. Now, his office wrote back to advise that the best way to help is by supporting your local credit union directly. I therefore contacted Essex Savers Credit Union and volunteered my help. That was last July, I think. Now, staffed mainly by volunteers, credit unions are not-for-profit banks. That's essentially what they are. And they're dedicated to encouraging thrift in the community and providing affordable loans to its account holders at a typical interest rate of 1 to 2% a month. Compare that to 1,500% a year. Regardless, and that's key, regardless of their previous credit history, you can build a whole new credit history with a credit union. Now, encouraging thrift, is a rather fancy set of words, simply means educating people in the Micawber principle. And we all know the Micawber principle from Charles Dickens. Annual income £20, annual expenditure £19, 19 and sixpence. Result, happiness. Annual income £20, annual expenditure £20 and sixpence. Result, misery. How close the void between heaven and hell. To join a credit union, you simply open a bank account with that credit union. The credit union will then offer a range of accounts to suit individual needs and will ensure that members' deposits are utilised directly to promote the right use of money, and as such are fully aligned to the spirit of John Wesley. Now, there are some restrictions. You have to be within that credit union's field of membership to open an account with it. Credit union's field of membership is agreed and authorised by the Bank of England when the credit union is set up. Now, Essex Savers has a current field of membership covering any individual or business living or working in the geography administered by the local authorities of Essex Council, Thurrock and Southend. Now, the government has explicitly recognised the social value of credit unions as a response to the financial crisis. For example, the potential savings for the Brentwood local council, I happen to run the service point for Brentwood, realised from having a strong credit union presence in the area is estimated to be about £1.1 million per annum. And that's generated through savings on repossessions and reduced cost of homelessness. As a result, the coalition actually implemented legislation in 2012 to encourage growth in the sector by removing some of the previous restrictions on membership and allowing companies to become members with a view to helping small businesses with affordable loans. There is, however, a problem. Essex Savers has a current membership of 3,500. Now, without a significant growth in membership, to say 9,000, of normal everyday depositors such as you and I, the credit union simply will not have sufficient loan capital to make loans and build reserves to develop the type of systems, publicity and availability to realise Archbishop Welby's vision to make the payday lenders redundant. You can imagine it's extremely difficult to compete with the advertising spend of payday lenders where public awareness of the credit union alternative is so dire. In North America, this is a staggering statistic, in North America, 30% of the entire population have a credit union account. Whilst in Ireland, that statistic is an amazing 50%. Now, those countries do not have a market for payday lenders. Sadly, in the UK, credit unions have been largely ignored, which has kept credit union membership small, about 3% of the population. And this low supply and lack of awareness has let the payday lenders and the loan sharks in. Indeed, in Essex, that figure is less than 1%. The simple fact is, all that is required for the UK to make payday lenders redundant is for a material percentage of the population, I mean not 30 or 50, maybe 10%, to place just some of their existing savings 100% securely, because it's all guaranteed, in a credit union account for use in the community. How reminiscent of Edmund Burke's famous quotation, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Archbishop Welby's backing with the Church of England is certainly making a difference. And the Catholic Church have committed to recruiting 250 new members to Essex Savers, specifically to contribute the good fight. Given the tie back to John Wesley, I'd like to see the Methodist Church get actively involved as well. Such a united campaign would send out a powerful message to the country. And if we were successful in driving the payday lenders out of business, it would reinvigorate the significance of the Christian church in modern Britain. Perhaps you have some questions.
Yeah. How real are the social benefits that you've quoted?
Well, as I said, the calculation of £1.1 million for Brentwood is calculated on the basis that there are a number of people who are made repossessed over a year. About 100 repossessions are made in Brentwood a year. Coming to a credit union will stop that repossession occurring, and the cost of a repossession to the community, and that I mean basically to the taxpayer, is £40,000 per person. Secondly, the cost of someone being made homelessness, and that would be prevented by someone being able to get a loan that prevents them becoming homeless, would save the community £25,000 a year. And those aren't figures that I've made up. Those are figures that are in the public domain from a charity called Erasmus, which is a charity based in Cambridge. So it is very genuine, the savings, and they're calculated pretty fully.
What do you do in Essex Savers?
What do I do? Oh, right. Okay, so I rung up Essex Savers in July and said, what can I do? And I had a discussion with Alison Davis, who's the president of the credit union. She's actually the only person who's paid in the credit union. The rest of the organisation is volunteered. And she said, oh, well, what's your business? Oh, IT. I do IT. And so she said, oh, you can help a little bit with that. And she said, where do you live? I said, I live in Doddinghurst near Brentwood. She said, oh, you can set up a service point for us. So I set up a service point as well. And since then, I've actually joined the board. I'm responsible now for strategies, budgeting, and doing their plans and strategic plans for their improvement in IT when they can afford it, which they can't at the moment. So that's what I do in Essex Savers.
Question, Chris. So our service point in Billericay runs out of Billericay Library on a Tuesday from, I hope I get this right, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Have I got that right? Yeah. So where's yours in Brentwood? All right, yes. Okay, so I run it out of Brentwood Barclays Bank. Now there's a surprise for you. So I've got a desk in the front of Barclays, in the window, with my posters up, and those posters are up all the time. And I'm there from 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock on Wednesday. And you might say, well, what on earth are Barclays Bank allowing a credit union in there as a competition? But of course, we're not a competition. Barclays Bank turn away people because they can't give them credit. So they recognize that it's better not to turn them away from their premises. It's better to perhaps pass them over to ourselves. Yes, so I run out of Barclays Bank, and our strategy is to try and get as many of that type of location as possible, because one of the things that has been preventing credit union growth, apart from just pure publicity, apart from people just knowing about it, is location not necessarily being very obvious, and so therefore full high street locations within a bank is quite nice. And secondly, people are worried about their money. Now, of course, a credit union's deposits are covered 100% guaranteed in the same way as any deposit for any bank, because we're all regulated by the Bank of England. It's exactly the same. So it actually is safe, but people are nervous about things like that, obviously. And being in a financial institution, I think, gives people some sort of comfort that, oh, yes, this is all very kosher and this is all very sort of proper. And that's one of the reasons why we are looking to set up more and more of those relationships with banks. We're also talking to Lloyds Bank as well. I think Bob at the back's got a question, and then I'll come to Anne, and then to Steve.
How come that payday lenders cannot be made illegal? Because I understand they're illegal in certain states in America and also in certain member states of the EU. Can pressure be put on the government to make them totally illegal?
Well, of course they could do, and the government could decide to do that. I am actually not in favour of that. I believe that competing the payday lenders out of business is much stronger, in the same way as I believe in democracy. I believe that there is freedom for people.
to do what they need, and that the power of society, i.e. the power of democracy, is a much stronger and powerful tool than legislation. People always find a way out of legislation. They will try to get round it, and they will find some words which allows them to cheat in some sort of way. Whereas if society as a whole simply competes them out of business just by supporting credit unions, that is so powerful the payday lenders won't even try. You don't need to legislate, is my belief. So I love the idea of Justin Welby's idea of competing them out of business. That's just fantastic.
Are the accounts purely saving accounts, or are there current accounts as well? Do you have online banking? What sort of credit interest rates are payable on savings? And could the church account transfer to Essex Savings account?
Okay, I will try and remember all those questions. Okay, so is it just savings accounts? No. What I'll do is I will speak in general and then say what Essex Savers do. So different credit unions obviously have different rules of their own rules that they've set up. So in general, credit unions as a whole, credit unions can have as many accounts as a normal bank. In fact, there are two types of credit unions. There are type 1 and type 2. Type 1 credit unions are what Essex Savers are, which are comparatively small, have a limited number of different accounts, and I'll explain what those are in a second. But type 2 credit unions do everything that a bank does. Mortgages, ISAs, investments and everything else like that. So if you went to Glasgow, which happens to have a very strong credit union, or Manchester, that has got a very strong credit union. There's a very strong credit union in the middle of London as well. So there are a few very strong ones, that's where the 3% of the UK comes from. All the rest of the country is sort of 0.005%. So there are some very strong credit unions, and they do the full work. There's only about 10 of those in the whole country. There are about 300 credit unions in total, of which Essex Savers is one, and we're one of the type 1s. So what do we have? Yes, we do have a current account. So what that gives you is for someone who has no choice, i.e. they can't get a bank account, and there's a surprising number of people in this world who can't do that, and you can't imagine how devastating that is, and how crippling it is not to have a current account. You can't do anything. We can provide a current account with a debit card. It's a prepaid debit card that can be used in all the different ATMs across the country. The post office, you can always cash checks in. So there's an enormous access, even through a small credit union. We have pure savings accounts as well. That's for people to have accounts. And we also have Janjar accounts for people to save for the holidays and so forth. That's in Essex Savers. But in principle, a credit union can have as much as any standard bank. It depends on the credit union, how far and wide it goes. There was a further question on there, wasn't there? Interest rates, right. Okay, so in general, credit unions can provide interest on their savings accounts. There is nothing against that. In fact, the recent legislation has explicitly enabled credit unions to do that as part of trying to support credit unions in business. However, a credit union cannot afford to pay interest rate until they have a reasonable profit coming in. If you think about it, as I said, we're 3,500. We need 9,000 members and essentially a loan book of about 1.75 million. Our current loan book is 750,000. To basically, from those low interest rates, to make a profit. So we, as a credit union in Essex Savers, are still in the growth phase and still rely on grants and so forth from our community, and we're always doing that every year. Obviously, that's getting less as we grow. Once you get to about 9,000, then you have enough money coming in, and at that point, you would be able to offer interest on accounts, and some do. That's not the only way that you can make money out of credit unions as a depositor. Credit unions are mutual banks. It's like Nationwide and the old building societies, in that if a profit is made at the end of the year, those profits are then distributed amongst the shareholders. And guess what? The shareholders in a credit union are the depositors. So you get the percentage of the profit that your deposit basically accounts for. And the maximum interest rate on that is 8%. So in other words, if you've got a very successful credit union, has a huge membership, has a huge loan book, essentially you'd be able to get 8%. Essex Savers, we can't afford to pay interest. We're still in the growth phase. So our savings accounts provide zero interest. And we have yet to make a profit over a year, and therefore we have yet to distribute a dividend. But that will happen as we get up to 9,000 and beyond. That would be the objective. Yeah. Online banking. Many credit unions, so in general, do have online banking. We have a website, but we haven't implemented And we have a system that allows online banking, but we haven't implemented the online banking because that costs £5,000 a year, and we don't make enough money to be able to pay for that yet. However, that doesn't mean that from your normal account you can't transfer by backs and back again. That is all available, but in terms of going online to your statements and doing everything else that you'd do, say, in Lloyd's, we haven't implemented that yet. Our strategy is to implement that as soon as we possibly can afford it, and then it would go.
Question from Steve. Maybe this will be the last question, but I think you'll be available afterwards for any more.
As you expand into areas where conventional building societies and banks really fear to tread, what's going to be the impact of bad debts when people don't repay the loans to you?
Okay, so bad debt is just an inevitable problem when you explicitly serve a group that has a bad credit history. But remember our purpose. Our purpose is to encourage thrift. So McCorbett's story is essentially the message. So when you join a credit union, firstly, we talk to you about if you are... So there are two types of people who join credit unions. One who wants to deposit some money to ensure that their money is used in the community. Those are essentially the ethical banking group. And there's obviously a large number of those. And there are those people who need to join a credit union because they want to get a cheap loan, because otherwise they'd be going to payday lenders. And in the latter group, we spend a lot of time with ourselves and partners working through people's budgets and working out how they can manage within their budget, i.e. have sixpence at the end of the month, and then you're in heaven. And that's what we encourage. And we then say, once you can demonstrate a certain amount of saving, and it can be, tiny amounts a month, we will start to lend to you. And also, we won't lend you huge amounts. We won't, we probably the maximum loan which we loan out is about £10,000. So we don't equate to a Lloyd's who might sort of loan out a mortgage worth. So £10,000, but we'll start at £500 or £100 and then move our way upwards to about 10,000. So we manage our debt very closely. That's the answer to your question, is that's what happens. We try to encourage, and the whole point is to encourage people to understand and resolve financial issues through financial discipline, because that's actually the best way of doing it. And we provide loans to give you time to do that. So that's the idea. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So as part of my volunteer work at the Whitechapel Mission, I have run a life skills program for male clients on Tuesday afternoons. And that's a rolling program, and it's of different activities on a 7-week cycle. Now, week 6 looks at motivation. Now, on one occasion, we were playing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Because money is a motivator, you see. Who wants to be a millionaire? For real money. And this is with a group of homeless people, albeit obviously for somewhat reduced prizes. The maximum for answering all 10 questions correctly was £30. But one of the clients attending was a young British man named Aidan. He's about 32 years old. And he's unable to read or write and fell into bad company as a youngster, and he's been in and out of prison since. He has, however, worked very hard to sort his life out and comes across in everyday conversation as shy, but essentially bright, thoughtful, and intelligent. He manages remarkably well despite the relentless impediment of his literacy, of which he is achingly embarrassed. Now, our objective for him would be to get his confidence into a place where he is willing to try and do something about his illiteracy. Go to a class, go to some training. Because until he does do that, his life will remain tethered, and he will not be able to progress much further into a normal life of work. Sadly, we have not achieved that yet. But he did something quite remarkable that day. He had a go at the game, and he managed to answer the first 5 questions correctly to win £6. As we were packing up to leave at the end of the day, he drew me aside, gave me back the £6, and asked me to donate it to the Whitechapel Mission. I explained that I really wanted him to have the money. He had earned it fair and square, and it was his. Aidan would not take no for an answer, and simply insisted that he wanted to donate it to the mission. Now, Aidan lives on benefits of about £55 a week. Put that in context. If he had been on someone on average earnings for this country of £25,000 a year, he had just done the equivalent of putting £140
in the Sunday collection box. It is indeed a wonderful world. We salute the fighting spirit of the Christian community in defending the poor and attacking their oppressors in our next hymn. Fight the good fight.